Go. When going becomes your modus operandi, life gets crazy good. Introduction. Jesus' last command to his followers before he ascended into heaven was, "Go into all the world and preach the gospel to all creation." At the very beginning of this book, I want you to know my purpose for writing. I want you to make go your modus operandi. Modus operandi is a Latin term used in English, and it's used to describe an individual's or group's habitual way of operating, which forms a discernible pattern. In each chapter, I'll share a challenge to going, or a reason for going, and then illustrate it with some real-life experiences that I never would have had without going. I was raised in an amazing Christian home, and my dad has been a faithful preacher of the gospel for 65 plus years. But I never planned to obey Jesus' last command. Instead, I was looking forward to chasing and conquering the American dream. I received a bachelor's degree in business administration and looked forward to a life of making lots of money as a Christian businessman. My transition from desiring more money to going was gradual. I had enjoyed some good years and some lean years in the real estate business, during which time I was asked by our church's youth pastor to help as a sponsor. Something began to change within. After a couple years, it hit me. I enjoyed watching the lives of teenagers change more than depositing the checks that come with each real estate deal. When our youth pastor was led to move to another church in Florida, the opportunity came for me to move into that position. During the summer of 1992, my wife Janet and I took our youth to a summer camp in Arkansas that was offered and led by Youth with a Mission. On the last day of the camp, during the last teaching, the Lord had a big-time surprise for me. Winky Pratney was teaching by video on ministering to this generation. I don't remember anything in the message but this one question. What would you do for God if you knew you could not fail? We loaded up the vans with my wife driving one and me driving the other and began our trip back up to Olathe, Kansas. During the drive, all I could think about was the question posed by Winky. And to my shock, the answer that came to my mind was to go into every country in the world and preach the gospel. When we finally arrived home, Janet and I went to bed exhausted. A week of summer camp would wear the world's best marathoner out. But as we laid down, I told Janet what I had been thinking about during the drive. That caused her to pop up quickly. Over the next few days, we talked about the adventures and costs that going into all the world would entail. For the two of us, it seemed challenging, but then add to it 3 small children, years 1, 4, and 6, and it seemed nearly impossible. But Janet's willingness to say yes was the icing on the cake. Fast forward to today, consisting of over 30 years of going, and I've had the privilege of ministering in 149 countries. By the end of this year, it will probably be over 150. But I can't take credit for what's happened. I think it is best explained in John 15:16. You did not choose me, but I chose you, and appointed you that you should go and bear fruit. God chose me, not to just bear fruit, but to go. How about you? It's not about the number of countries, or if you go short-term or long-term. or if you go by airplane, bus, or camel. The key is going. I know there are reasons why you can't go. Some of these reasons seem really legit. It was November 2004 when I was leading Youth with a Mission Jacksonville that myself and two of our staff members felt like the Lord was leading us to visit Iraq. One of our staff had moved there a year or so before, and we wanted to go encourage him. But there was one big problem. The Iraq War, which began in 2003, was going on in full force. But the three of us really thought the Lord was saying to go. I contacted the Iraqi embassy in Washington, D.C. to inquire about obtaining a visa. They informed me without hesitation or question that no visas were being issued. They reminded me, as if I needed it, that there was a war going on. So that's a pretty convincing reason for not going, right? But we believed the Lord was saying something different. So we took a big risk and bought airline tickets to Turkey. After spending the night in Istanbul, we took a small plane to a town near the border of Iraq called Silapi. We deplaned and walked across the tarmac into the small terminal. A local taxi driver came up to me and asked, "Do you want to go to Iraq?" I turned around and asked one of our staff guys, "Did you hear what he just said?" We both laughed, and I turned back to the taxi driver and said, "Yes, can you help us?" He said, "No problem." I have traveled to enough places by this time to know that when someone says no problem, it doesn't mean there will be no problems. We got into the taxi, and after a short drive, he pulled to the side of the road and asked for our passports. He took them, ran across the street, and within a few minutes was back with our passports and a sheet of paper in each. He then took us to the border. Again, he jumped out with our passports and took them into the Turkey immigration office. After a short time, he returned and we were stamped out of Turkey. Our taxi driver, in broken English, pointed to the Iraqi immigration office and said we needed to walk over there. We would then have to get an Iraqi taxi. At this time, we were in no man's land. We are stamped out of Turkey and trying to enter a country that isn't receiving visitors. But our confidence was in the Lord and His speaking to us to go. So we walked into the Iraqi immigration office. A couple officials told us to sit down, and they motioned for Tony, one of our staff, to come with them into a private office. It was good they picked Tony because he was one of the funnest, craziest, and deeply committed followers of Jesus that I have ever met. Once in the private office, they asked Tony why we had come into Iraq. He told them we were tourists. They weren't buying it. They said there are no tourists in Iraq now because there's a war going on. Tony said he knew that, but we were there to see their beautiful country. 10 minutes didn't go by, and here comes Tony and two of the officers laughing and slapping each other on the back. They stamped our passports to enter, and we found a taxi that took us to Duhok, Iraq. Reasons not to go? Number 1, no visas being issued. Number 2, a war is happening. Number 3, we have no contacts to help us at the border. Number 4, etc., etc., etc. Blah, blah, blah. Reasons to go. Number 1, Jesus said to go. Period. That's enough. We could have gotten all the way to Turkey and been turned away at the border. We could have gotten into Iraq to find ourselves in a very dangerous and precarious situation. Who wants to live life worried about could-haves? We had a strong conviction that the Lord was leading us to Iraq. The phrase, "No, Lord," is self-contradictory. It is saying two things that cannot both be correct. I believe that many people, especially young people, are not attracted to the Christian life because they consider it to be boring. I can testify to the fact that when you go, it is usually not boring. I've had the privilege of walking on the Great Wall, viewing the majesty of Mount Everest, riding camels out to the pyramids in Egypt, spending the night camping in the Sahara Desert, snorkeling in the beautiful Maldive Islands, and the list goes on. All of this, without exception, is because of going in obedience to the Great Commission of Jesus. So I hope as you read this book, you will enjoy the stories of a life spent going, but more importantly, I hope you make a decision to have go as your modus operandi. Keith Green said it well. If you don't have a definite call to stay here, you are called to go. But did Jesus really command us to go? Or did he command us to make disciples wherever we are? This command, known as the Great Commission, needs to be clarified. I'll do that in chapter 1.